It was supposed to be just another ordinary Tuesday evening. My husband Marcus and I had just finished dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant downtown, the one with the red checkered tablecloths and the owner who always remembered our usual order. The autumn air was crisp, carrying that distinct smell of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke that made you want to wrap yourself in a warm sweater. We were laughing about something silly, one of those inside jokes that only make sense when you've been married for 7 years, when Marcus suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "I forgot to feed the parking meter," he said, patting his pockets with that familiar look of mild panic. "I'll be right back, just give me 2 minutes." I nodded and leaned against the brick wall of the restaurant, watching him jog down the sidewalk toward where we'd parked 3 blocks away. The streetlights had just flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. I pulled out my phone, absently scrolling through messages, when I felt someone standing very close to me. Too close. That uncomfortable proximity that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I looked up to find an elderly woman directly in front of me. She couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that were an unusual shade of pale gray, almost colorless. She was wearing a long dark coat that looked expensive but outdated, like something from a different era. What struck me most wasn't her appearance, though. It was the intensity of her gaze. She was staring at me with such focus, such purpose, that I actually took a step back. "You don't know me," she said, her voice surprisingly strong for someone who looked to be in her 80s. "But I know you. I know what's coming for you." Before I could respond, before I could even process what she'd said, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. It was cream-colored, the kind of expensive stationery you might use for wedding invitations, and it was clearly stuffed with something. She grabbed my hand with surprising strength, her fingers cold and papery against my skin, and pressed the envelope into my palm. $20,000, she whispered, leaning even closer. "You're going to need every penny of it. What's coming will test everything you believe about your marriage, about trust, about the person sleeping next to you every night." My heart was pounding now, a mix of fear and confusion flooding through me. I tried to pull my hand away, but she held firm. "I don't understand," I managed to say, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "Who are you? Why are you giving me money? I don't need your money." The old woman's expression didn't change. "You will. In exactly 11 days, your world is going to shatter. Marcus isn't who you think he is. He's been keeping a secret so big, so devastating, that when it comes out, everything you thought you knew about your life will be revealed as a carefully constructed lie." I felt like the ground was tilting beneath me. This had to be some kind of scam, some elaborate con, but there was something in her eyes, a sadness mixed with certainty, that made my blood run cold. "You're insane," I said, finally managing to pull my hand free. "I'm calling the police." "No, you won't," she said calmly, "because deep down, you already suspect something is wrong. Haven't you noticed the late nights? The phone calls he takes in another room? The way he's been distant lately, distracted? You've been telling yourself it's work stress, that he's just going through something. But you know, don't you? In that quiet voice in the back of your mind that you keep trying to silence, you know something isn't right." The terrible thing was, she wasn't entirely wrong. Marcus had been different lately, more secretive, more absent even when he was sitting right next to me. I'd been attributing it to the stress of his new promotion, the longer hours at the office. But there were moments, small moments I'd been pushing away, where I'd caught him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, almost like guilt, almost like fear. "How do you know my husband's name?" I demanded, trying to regain some sense of control over this surreal situation. "Have you been following us? Watching us?" The old woman finally stepped back, creating some distance between us. "I know because I've lived through this exact scenario before. Different names, different faces, but the same devastating truth. I'm trying to save you from what I couldn't save myself from. That money isn't a gift, it's a lifeboat. When the truth comes out, you're going to need to disappear quickly. You're going to need resources to start over, to protect yourself." "Protect myself from what?" I was almost shouting now, drawing concerned looks from a couple walking past. From my husband? Marcus would never hurt me. We love each other. Whatever game you're playing, whatever mental illness is making you do this, I want no part of it. I shoved the envelope back toward her, but she refused to take it. Instead, she simply let it fall to the ground between us. "Keep it or don't," she said, her voice taking on a quality that was almost pitying. "But you will remember this conversation. On day 11, when your life implodes, you'll think back to this moment and wish you'd listened. You'll wish you'd prepared." "Sarah?" Marcus's voice cut through the tension. He was jogging back toward us, slightly out of breath. "Everything okay? Who's this?" I turned toward him, relief flooding through me at his familiar presence, and when I turned back, the old woman was simply gone. Not walking away, not disappearing into a crowd, just gone, as if she'd never been there at all. The only evidence of the encounter was the cream-colored envelope lying on the sidewalk at my feet, slightly luminous in the streetlight. Marcus reached me, his face flushed from the jog back, and immediately noticed my expression. I must have looked pale, shaken, because his smile faded instantly and concern flooded his features. "Sarah, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth to tell him everything, about the strange old woman, about her cryptic warnings, about the envelope lying at my feet. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me, with that same unreadable expression I'd noticed lately. Maybe it was the seed of doubt the woman had planted, already taking root despite my best efforts to dismiss it. Or maybe it was simply that the whole encounter felt so bizarre, so dreamlike, that I wasn't even sure how to put it into words. "I'm fine," I heard myself say, forcing a smile. "Just felt a little dizzy for a second. Maybe the wine at dinner?" He studied my face for a moment longer, and I could see him deciding whether to push or let it go. He chose the latter, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "Let's get you home then. Want me to bring the car around?" "No, the walk will do me good," I said, then bent down quickly and scooped up the envelope before he could see it clearly. I shoved it into my purse, my heart hammering. Why was I hiding it from him? This was Marcus, my husband, the man I'd promised to share everything with. Yet here I was, literally hiding evidence of a strange encounter not 2 minutes after it happened. We walked to the car in relative silence, Marcus filling the quiet with mundane observations about the restaurant, about the weather getting colder, about needing to winterize the house before the first freeze. Normal, domestic concerns. The kind of conversation we'd had 1,000 times before. But now, with the weight of that envelope in my purse and the old woman's words echoing in my head, everything felt different, contaminated somehow. When we got home, Marcus went straight to his study, claiming he had some emails to catch up on. This had become routine lately, these late-evening work sessions behind closed doors. Before tonight, I'd never questioned it. Now, I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at the closed door of his study down the hall, wondering what he was really doing in there. I pulled the envelope from my purse with trembling hands. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened, to pretend this entire evening had never happened. But curiosity, or maybe it was fear, made me slide my finger under the sealed flap. The paper was thick, expensive, and it tore with a satisfying whisper. Inside were stacks of $100 bills, crisp and new, bound with paper bands. I'd never seen this much cash in person before. I counted quickly, my hands shaking. $20,000, exactly as the woman had said. This wasn't some elaborate prank or the ramblings of a confused elderly person. This was real money, serious money, and someone had just handed it to me on a street corner with a warning about my husband. I sat on the edge of our bed, the money spread out before me, and tried to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the woman had mistaken me for someone else. Maybe she was involved in some kind of scam and this was the setup, though I couldn't imagine what kind of scam involved giving away $20,000. Maybe she was simply mentally ill, living in a delusion, and had withdrawn her life savings to give to a stranger because of some paranoid fantasy. But then why did her words feel so precise? How did she know Marcus's name? How did she know about the late nights, the distant behavior, the phone calls taken in other rooms. I heard the door to his study open, and I quickly shoved the money back into the envelope and hid it in the bottom drawer of my dresser, underneath my winter sweaters. Marcus appeared in the doorway of our bedroom, loosening his tie. "You sure you're feeling okay?" he asked, crossing to where I sat. He placed his hand on my forehead, checking for fever, and the gesture was so tender, so familiar, that I felt tears prick at my eyes. "I'm sure," I lied. "Just tired." He kissed the top of my head and started getting ready for bed. I watched him go through his nightly routine, brushing his teeth, changing into his pajamas, setting his phone on the nightstand to charge. Every movement was so normal, so Marcus, that the old woman's warning seemed absurd. This was my husband. I knew him. I knew his habits, his quirks, the way he always put on his left sock before his right, the way he couldn't sleep without checking that the front door was locked at least twice. But did I really know him? How well can you ever truly know another person, even someone you've lived with for years? We all have private thoughts, secret fears, parts of ourselves we keep hidden even from those closest to us. What if Marcus had been keeping more than just thoughts hidden? What if there was an entire dimension to his life that I knew nothing about? We lay in bed that night, Marcus falling asleep almost immediately the way he always did, while I stared at the ceiling in the darkness. His breathing became deep and regular beside me, and I turned my head to look at him. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, his face looked peaceful, innocent even. This was the man who had proposed to me on a hiking trail at sunrise, who had cried when we thought we couldn't have children, who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning without being asked. The man who, according to a strange old woman, was living a lie so massive it would destroy everything. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and Marcus already gone. A note on his pillow said he'd had an early meeting and didn't want to wake me. I reached for my phone and saw it was already 9:30. I'd slept later than I had in years. The envelope was still in my dresser drawer. I checked, just to make sure I hadn't dreamed the entire thing. The money was real. The encounter had been real, and now I had to decide what to do about it. I spent that morning in a fog, going through the motions of my work-from-home routine without really accomplishing anything. I was a graphic designer, freelance, which meant my schedule was flexible and largely self-directed. Usually, I loved this freedom. Today, it just meant I had endless hours to obsess over the previous night's encounter. By afternoon, I'd made a decision. I needed to know who that woman was and why she'd targeted me. I needed to understand what she thought she knew about Marcus, and I needed to do it without alerting my husband that anything was wrong, because if he was innocent, I didn't want to hurt him with baseless suspicions, and if he wasn't innocent, well, I needed to be careful. I started by doing something I'd never done before, something that made me feel guilty and invasive even as I was doing it. I went into Marcus's study and began looking through his things, not overtly, not throwing drawers open and rifling through papers, but carefully, methodically, putting everything back exactly as I found it. His desk was neat, organized, filled with the usual detritus of a working professional. Client files, expense reports, business cards collected at conferences. His computer was password protected, something I'd never thought about before because I'd never had a reason to access it. Now, it felt significant. What was he protecting? I was about to give up when I noticed something odd. In the back of his bottom desk drawer, behind a stack of old tax returns, was a small leather journal. It wasn't the journal itself that caught my attention. It was the fact that it was hidden. Marcus wasn't a journal keeper. I'd never known him to write down personal thoughts or keep a diary. So what was this? My hands were shaking as I pulled it out and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was definitely Marcus's, that familiar scrawl I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards for years. But the words were completely foreign to me. The first entry was dated 6 months ago, and it began with a sentence that made my blood run cold. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this from Sarah. Every day the weight of what I'm hiding grows heavier, and I'm terrified of what will happen when the truth finally comes out." I stood frozen in Marcus's study, the journal trembling in my hands, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The old woman's words echoed through my mind with terrifying clarity. 11 days. A secret so devastating it would shatter everything. I wanted to slam the journal shut, to shove it back in the drawer and pretend I'd never found it. But I couldn't. My eyes were already scanning the next lines, hungry and desperate for answers, even as I dreaded what I might find. The investigation is getting closer. Detective Morrison called again today, asking more questions about that night. I told him the same thing I've told everyone, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. He knows something doesn't add up. Sarah asked me why I seemed distracted at dinner. I blamed it on work stress. How can I tell her that I might be a suspect in something I didn't do? How can I explain that one mistake, one terrible choice, has put everything we've built together at risk? My legs felt weak. I sank into Marcus's desk chair, still gripping the journal. A detective? An investigation? What night was he talking about? I flipped forward, my hands clumsy with panic, searching for more context. The entries weren't daily, they were sporadic, written whenever Marcus apparently felt overwhelmed enough to put pen to paper. An entry from 4 months ago read, "Met with the lawyer again today. He says I should tell Sarah everything, that having her in the dark only makes things worse if this goes to trial. But how can I? She'll look at me differently. She'll wonder if she ever really knew me at all. Sometimes I catch her watching me, and I wonder if she already suspects. If somehow she knows that the man she married is capable of things she never imagined." Trial? What trial? I felt like I was falling, the familiar walls of Marcus's study spinning around me. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of nightmare, a stress-induced hallucination. But the journal was solid in my hands, the ink was real, and Marcus's handwriting was unmistakable. I kept reading, flipping through pages, trying to piece together a coherent picture from these fragmented confessions. There were references to someone named Daniel, mentions of "that night at the warehouse," cryptic notes about security footage and witness statements. Each entry painted my husband as someone embroiled in something dark, something dangerous, something he'd been hiding from me for months. The most recent entry was from just 3 days ago. Sarah smiled at me this morning over coffee, so trusting, so innocent of what's really happening. "In 10 days, the grand jury convenes. In 10 days, I'll either be cleared or I'll be formally charged. If it's the latter, there's no more hiding it. Everything comes out. Our life together ends one way or another. I should tell her now, give her time to prepare, but I'm a coward. I'd rather have these last few days of normalcy, of pretending we're still just a regular couple with regular problems." 10 days. The old woman had said 11 days, but Marcus had written this 3 days ago. That meant in 8 days, something catastrophic was going to happen. A grand jury, formal charges. This wasn't an affair, wasn't a secret gambling debt or hidden financial trouble. This was criminal. This was serious enough to potentially put my husband in prison. I heard a noise from the front of the house and jumped so violently that I nearly dropped the journal. The front door. Marcus was home early. I had seconds to decide what to do. I shoved the journal back into the drawer, tried to arrange the tax returns exactly as I'd found them, and rushed out of his study. My heart was racing, my palms sweating. I made it to the kitchen just as Marcus walked in, his tie loosened, carrying a bouquet of flowers. "Surprise," he said, holding out the flowers with a smile that looked almost sad around the edges. "I know I've been distant lately. I thought maybe we could have a nice evening together, order in, watch a movie, just be with each other." I stared at the flowers, at his hopeful expression, and felt my world tilt further off its axis. This was classic guilty behavior, wasn't it? The sudden romantic gesture, the desire to spend quality time together before everything fell apart. Or was I reading sinister motivations into a simple, kind act from my husband? "They're beautiful," I managed to say, taking the flowers from him. "Roses, my favorite." He remembered. Of course he remembered. "What's the occasion?" Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify. "Do I need an occasion to buy my wife flowers?" "No, of course not. I just thought—" I stopped myself. What was I going to say? "I thought you were buttering me up before you told me you're about to be indicted for something?" "Thank you. They're perfect." We moved around each other in the kitchen, this strange dance of pretending everything was normal. Marcus ordered Thai food from our usual place while I put the flowers in water. We settled on the couch with our food, a romantic comedy playing on the television that neither of us was really watching. I kept stealing glances at him, searching his face for signs of the terrible secret he was carrying. He looked tired, I realized. There were dark circles under his eyes I hadn't noticed before, and he'd lost weight. How had I missed these signs? "Sarah," he said suddenly, setting down his pad thai and turning to face me fully. "There's something I need to tell you." My entire body went rigid. This was it. Whatever he'd been hiding, whatever the old woman had warned me about, it was all about to come spilling out. I set down my own food with trembling hands, trying to prepare myself for words that would change everything. He reached for my hand, his grip warm and familiar. "I know I haven't been myself lately. I know I've been preoccupied and distant, and that's not fair to you. You deserve better." I waited, barely breathing, for him to continue. The seconds stretched out, unbearably tense. "Work has been really intense," he finally said. "This new account, the pressure from upper management, it's been eating me alive. But that's not your burden to carry, and I'm sorry I've let it affect us. I'm going to do better, I promise." That was it. That was his big confession. A lie, or at least a partial truth designed to satisfy me without revealing anything real. I felt something crack inside me, some fundamental trust I hadn't even known was there until it broke. "Is that really all it is?" I heard myself ask. "Just work stress?" He looked at me with those familiar brown eyes, and I searched them for deception, for guilt, for any sign that would tell me who this man really was. What else would it be? I could confront him right then. I could tell him about the journal, about the old woman, about the $20,000 hidden in my dresser. I could demand the truth, all of it, no more deflections or partial explanations. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear of what I'd learn. Maybe it was a survival instinct, the same one that had made the old woman give me that money. If Marcus was in serious legal trouble, if he was potentially dangerous, confronting him before I understood the full situation could be a mistake. "Nothing," I said quietly. "I just want to make sure you're okay. That we're okay." He pulled me close, wrapping his arms around me, and I let him. But as I rested my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, I felt like I was hugging a stranger. The man I'd married, the one I thought I knew completely, had been replaced by someone wearing his face, speaking with his voice, but hiding something dark and dangerous beneath the surface. We finished the movie in silence, both of us pretending to be absorbed in a story neither of us cared about. When we went to bed that night, Marcus fell asleep quickly again, but I lay awake, my mind racing. I needed more information. The journal had given me fragments, pieces of a puzzle, but I needed to see the whole picture. In the darkness, listening to Marcus's breathing beside me, I made a decision that felt both necessary and like a betrayal. Tomorrow, I would start investigating my own husband. I would find out what he'd been hiding, what the old woman had known, and what was going to happen in 8 days when that grand jury convened. I would uncover the truth, whatever it cost me. Because living with this uncertainty, with these growing doubts and fears, was becoming unbearable. I needed to know who I was really married to, even if the answer destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. I turned my head to look at Marcus sleeping peacefully beside me, his face relaxed in sleep, and whispered into the darkness, "Who are you? What have you done?" He didn't answer, of course, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear that old woman's voice, cold and certain. "In 11 days, your world is going to shatter." 8 days now. I had 8 days to prepare for whatever was coming. 8 days to decide whether to stand by my husband or save myself. 8 days before everything changed forever. I woke up the next morning with a sense of grim determination. Marcus had already left for work, another early meeting according to the note on his pillow, and I was grateful for the solitude. I needed space to think, to plan, to become someone I'd never imagined I would be, a woman investigating her own husband. I made coffee with shaking hands, trying to organize my thoughts. What did I actually know? Marcus was involved in something serious enough to warrant a detective's attention, possibly serious enough to result in criminal charges. There was someone named Daniel involved, something that happened at a warehouse, and a grand jury convening in 8 days. It wasn't much, but it was a starting point. I sat at my laptop and began searching, starting with the most obvious query: Marcus's name combined with terms like investigation, charges, and criminal. Nothing came up except his LinkedIn profile and some old mentions in company press releases. I tried adding Daniel to the search, but without a last name it was useless. There were thousands of Daniels in our city alone. Then I remembered something from the journal: Detective Morrison. That was a specific name, a real person I could potentially track down. I searched for detectives with that name in our area and found 3: James Morrison in the robbery division, Patricia Morrison in Vice, and Robert Morrison in Homicide. Homicide. The word sent a chill through me. Surely not. Marcus couldn't be involved in anything related to murder. But then again, a week ago I would have said he couldn't be involved in anything requiring a detective's attention at all. And here I was. I decided to try a different approach. I pulled up our credit card statements, something I rarely looked at closely since Marcus handled most of our finances. I started going back through the past 6 months, looking for anything unusual. Most of it was mundane: grocery stores, gas stations, the usual subscription services. But then I noticed something odd. Starting about 5 months ago, there were regular charges to a law firm, Blackwell & Associates, always in amounts of $1,500 or $2,000, paid monthly. We didn't have a family lawyer, didn't have any ongoing legal matters that I knew about. These charges alone totaled over $10,000. What kind of legal trouble required that much money? I Googled Blackwell & Associates and found their website. It was a criminal defense firm. The words on the screen seemed to pulse. Experienced criminal defense attorneys serving clients in all types of cases, from white-collar crimes to violent offenses. This was real. This wasn't my paranoia or the ravings of a strange old woman. Marcus had hired criminal defense attorneys and had been paying them thousands of dollars for months. My phone rang, startling me so badly I nearly knocked over my coffee. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" A woman's voice, professional, slightly cold. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Patricia Morrison. I'm a detective with the city police department. I was hoping we could talk about your husband, Marcus Mitchell." The coffee cup slipped from my hands, splashing across my desk. Detective Morrison. Not Robert from Homicide, thank God, but Patricia from Vice. What did Vice handle? Drugs? Prostitution? Organized crime? I grabbed napkins with shaking hands, trying to clean up the spill while my mind raced. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you still there?" "Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, you just caught me off guard. What is this about?" "I'd rather discuss this in person if possible. Would you be able to meet me this afternoon? There's a coffee shop on Maple Street, The Grind. Do you know it?" Every instinct told me to refuse, to demand more information, to call Marcus and ask him what was happening. But a stronger instinct, one born of the growing fear and suspicion of the past 2 days, made me agree. "What time?" 2 o'clock work for you?" "I'll be there." The detective hung up, and I sat staring at my phone, my heart pounding. This was happening. This was real. In a few hours, I would be meeting with a police detective to discuss my husband's involvement in whatever criminal matter he'd been hiding from me. Part of me wanted to call Marcus right then, to demand answers, to give him a chance to explain before I spoke to the police. But I remembered his lies from the night before, the way he'd blamed everything on work stress, and I kept my phone in my hand without dialing. The hours until 2 o'clock crawled by with agonizing slowness. I tried to work, to distract myself with design projects, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept circling back to the same questions. What had Marcus done? How long had he been lying to me? And most terrifyingly, who was I really married to? At 1:30, I changed clothes 3 times, unable to decide what one wore to meet with a detective investigating one's husband. I finally settled on jeans and a sweater, trying to look casual and unconcerned, even though I felt like I might throw up. I drove to the grind in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets of my neighborhood. "That's impossible," I heard myself say. "Marcus wouldn't, he couldn't. You have the wrong person. There must be some mistake." "I understand this is difficult to hear," Detective Morrison said, her tone measured. "But I need to ask you some questions. Your cooperation could help us understand what really happened that night." "I don't know anything," I said, my mind reeling. "I didn't even know any of this was happening. Marcus never said a word about any investigation, any dead man, any of it." "That's not uncommon in these situations, but Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to think carefully. Has your husband exhibited any unusual behavior? Has he seemed stressed, paranoid, different in any way?" I thought about the late nights, the closed-door phone calls, the weight loss and the dark circles under his eyes. I thought about the journal entries, the lawyer fees, the lies about work stress. "Yes," I admitted quietly, "he's been different, distant, but I thought it was just work." Detective Morrison pulled out a notepad. "I need to ask you about your husband's whereabouts on the night of June 15th. Do you remember where he was?" June 15th. I tried to think back 6 months. Had there been anything significant about that night? I closed my eyes, searching my memory, and then I remembered. "He was at a conference," I said slowly. "A marketing conference in Chicago. He was gone for 3 days." The detective's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. "Are you certain about that?" "Yes. He left on a Thursday and came back on Sunday. I remember because it was our anniversary weekend, and we'd planned to celebrate when he got back." Even as I said the words, doubt crept in. Had I actually seen conference materials? Had he shown me photos, brought back a hotel keycard, any physical evidence that he'd really been in Chicago? "Mrs. Mitchell, your husband's car was captured on security footage here in the city on the night of June 15th. He wasn't in Chicago." The coffee shop seemed to fade around me, the ambient noise becoming a distant buzz. He'd lied. Not just about the investigation, but about where he'd been that night. He'd told me he was at a conference, had packed a bag and kissed me goodbye, and instead he'd been here, in a warehouse, where a man died. "I need to go," I said abruptly, starting to stand on shaking legs. "I can't do this right now." Detective Morrison reached across the table, not touching me but stopping my movement with her presence. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand you're in shock, but I need you to understand something. If your husband is innocent, talking to us can only help him. If he's guilty, you need to protect yourself. You don't want to become an accessory, to get caught up in obstruction charges because you helped him without knowing what you were helping him do." I sat back down, my legs unable to support me anymore. The detective's words echoed in my mind. Accessory, obstruction charges, protect yourself. The old woman had been right. She'd known this was coming, had tried to warn me, had given me money to escape. How had she known? Who was she? "Detective Morrison," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to know everything. If you're asking me to cooperate, if you're warning me about becoming an accessory, then I deserve to know the full truth about what you think my husband did." She studied me for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "Daniel Reeves was a private investigator. He'd been hired by someone, we're still trying to determine who, to look into a series of financial irregularities at the marketing firm where your husband works. We believe Daniel discovered something significant, something that would have destroyed careers and possibly led to criminal charges for several people at that company." "And you think Marcus killed him to keep him quiet?" "We think Daniel Reeves arranged to meet someone at that warehouse on June 15th to exchange information. We know your husband's car was there. We know Daniel died that night from blunt force trauma. What we don't know yet is exactly what happened in that warehouse, or whether your husband acted alone." Acted alone. The words suggested there might have been others involved. I thought about the journal entries, about Marcus's fear, about the lawyer fees. "You said you're still building your case, so you don't actually know for certain that Marcus killed this man. We have circumstantial evidence, the car, some financial records that show your husband had motive, and witness testimony that places him in a suspicious frame of mind around that time. What we don't have is direct physical evidence tying him to the actual killing. That's why the grand jury is so important." They'll decide if what we have is enough to formally charge him. I felt a small spark of hope ignite. Circumstantial evidence. That meant it was possible Marcus was innocent, that he'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, that there was an explanation for everything that didn't end with my husband being a murderer. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Detective Morrison leaned back, seeming to relax slightly now that I was cooperating. "I need you to tell me about any unusual activity, large cash withdrawals, unexplained absences, conversations that seemed strange or out of character. I need you to tell me about your husband's associates, anyone new who's come into his life in the past year, and most importantly, if you find anything, any evidence or information that might be relevant to this case, I need you to contact me immediately." She slid a business card across the table. I picked it up with numb fingers, staring at her name and number printed in crisp black letters. This was real. I was being asked to spy on my husband, to gather evidence that might send him to prison for murder. "There's something else you should know," Detective Morrison said, her voice gentler now. "In cases like this, spouses sometimes find themselves in danger. If your husband realizes you're cooperating with us, if he feels cornered or desperate, things could escalate quickly. I need you to be very careful, Mrs. Mitchell. Don't confront him directly about any of this. Don't let him know we've spoken." The spark of hope died as quickly as it had ignited. She was warning me that my husband might be dangerous, that the man I'd slept next to for 7 years might hurt me if he felt threatened. How had my life become something out of a crime drama in the span of just 2 days? "Do you think I'm in danger?" I asked bluntly. "Right now, living in the same house with him, do you think he would hurt me?" "I think your husband is under enormous pressure. The grand jury convenes in 8 days, and he knows his entire life hangs in the balance. People do unpredictable things when they're desperate. So yes, I think you should be cautious. I think you should have an exit strategy in case things go wrong." An exit strategy. $20,000 hidden in my dresser drawer. The old woman had known I'd need it, had known I'd need to disappear quickly. But how had she known any of this? The question had been nagging at me since the encounter, and now it felt urgent. "Detective Morrison, did anyone else know about your investigation? Any civilians? Any family members of Daniel Reeves? Anyone who might have reached out to me?" The detective's brow furrowed. "The investigation has been kept relatively quiet. Daniel's family knows, of course, and your husband's lawyers would know. Why do you ask?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain the old woman without sounding insane. 2 nights ago, a woman approached me outside a restaurant. She was elderly, said she knew what was coming for me, and she gave me $20,000 in cash. She told me that in 11 days, my world would shatter and I'd need money to disappear. Detective Morrison's expression shifted from curiosity to sharp attention. "Can you describe this woman?" About 5 feet tall, silver hair in a bun, gray eyes. She was wearing an expensive-looking dark coat. She knew my name, knew Marcus's name, and she seemed to know exactly what was about to happen to my marriage. "And she just gave you $20,000? No explanation, no demands?" "She said she'd lived through the same thing, that she was trying to save me from what she couldn't save herself from. Then she disappeared before my husband came back from the parking meter." The detective was writing quickly in her notepad now. "Do you still have the money?" "Yes, it's at home." "Mrs. Mitchell, this is important. That money could be evidence, or it could be connected to your husband's case in some way. I need you to bring it to the station. Let us examine it." The thought of giving up the money filled me with irrational panic. It was my lifeline, my escape route if everything went wrong, but I nodded slowly. "I'll bring it tomorrow." "Today would be better, this afternoon if possible." We talked for another 20 minutes, Detective Morrison asking detailed questions about Marcus's routine, his friends, his coworkers. I answered as best I could, but I realized with growing discomfort how little I actually knew about my husband's day-to-day life. I knew he went to work, knew he had meetings and clients, but the specifics were hazy. When had I stopped paying attention, or had he deliberately kept me in the dark? When I finally left the coffee shop, the afternoon sun felt too bright, the normal sounds of traffic and people going about their lives seeming surreal. How could the world just continue as normal when mine had been torn apart? I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to decide what to do next. I should go home, get the money, take it to the police station like Detective Morrison had asked. I should cooperate fully, protect myself from any legal consequences. But something held me back. The old woman had given me that money for a reason, had risked approaching me to warn me. If I turned it over to the police, would I be giving up my only safety net? Instead of going home, I found myself driving to Marcus's office. I'd only been there a handful of times over the years, usually just to meet him for lunch or to drop off something he'd forgotten. The building was downtown, a sleek glass and steel structure that housed several different companies. Marcus's firm, Whitmore Marketing Solutions, occupied the 12th floor. I parked in the visitor lot and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. What was I doing here? What did I hope to accomplish? But I needed to see him, needed to look at him with this new knowledge and try to reconcile the man I'd married with the man the police suspected of murder. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt endless. When the doors opened, I was greeted by the familiar reception area, all modern furniture and abstract art. The receptionist, a young woman named Kelly who I'd met before, smiled brightly when she saw me. "Mrs. Mitchell, what a nice surprise! Are you here to see Marcus?" "If he's available. I know I should have called first." "Let me check. He's been in meetings most of the day, but I think he's back in his office now." She picked up the phone and spoke quietly, then nodded at me. "You can go back. You remember where his office is?" I nodded and walked down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. Marcus's office was at the end, a corner office with windows overlooking the city. The door was partially open, and I could see him sitting at his desk, staring at his computer screen with an expression of deep concentration. I knocked softly, and he looked up. For just a second, before he registered who I was, his face showed naked fear. Then recognition flooded in and he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sarah, this is unexpected. Is everything okay?" I stepped into his office, closing the door behind me. The space was neat, professional, with framed awards on the walls and client presentations stacked on his desk. This was Marcus's domain, the place where he spent most of his waking hours, and I realized I'd barely thought about what he actually did here. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd surprise you," I lied, moving closer to his desk. "Maybe we could grab an early dinner." He glanced at his computer screen, then back at me. "I'd love to, but I've got a presentation to finish for tomorrow morning. Rain check?" "Sure," I said, scanning his office, looking for what, I wasn't sure. Evidence? Clues? Some sign that would tell me who this man really was. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course." But his body language had shifted, become defensive. "Do you remember our anniversary weekend last year, when you were at that conference in Chicago?" His face went very still. "Yeah, I remember. Why?" "I was just thinking about it. It was hard being apart on our anniversary. You were gone for 3 days, right?" "That's right." His voice was carefully neutral. "Did you take a lot of pictures? I don't think I ever saw any photos from the trip." The silence stretched out between us, charged with unspoken tension. Marcus's hand tightened on his mouse, and I saw a muscle jump in his jaw. "Sarah, what's this really about?" I looked into his eyes, searching for the truth, for any sign of the man I'd married beneath the stranger he'd become. "I just feel like I don't know what's going on with you anymore, like you're keeping something from me." He stood up then, walking around his desk to stand in front of me. "I told you last night, it's just work stress. I'm sorry I've been distant. I'm trying to do better." "Are you?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. "Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you're lying to me, Marcus. It feels like there's this whole part of your life that I know nothing about, and I'm starting to wonder if I ever really knew you at all." His face paled. For a moment, I thought he was going to confess everything, that the weight of his secrets would finally break him and the truth would come pouring out. But instead, he just looked at me with something that might have been grief, or might have been fear, and said quietly, "You know me, Sarah. Whatever you're worried about, whatever's making you doubt us, you know who I am." But I didn't. That was the terrifying truth. I didn't know who he was anymore, and I wasn't sure I ever had. I left Marcus's office feeling more unsettled than when I'd arrived. His reaction to my questions about Chicago had been telling, the way his entire body had tensed, the careful neutrality of his voice. He was hiding something, that much was clear. Whether it was murder or something else entirely, I still couldn't be sure. As I drove home through the late afternoon traffic, my phone rang. An unknown number again. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I answered using the car's Bluetooth. Mrs. Mitchell? A man's voice this time, older, with a slight rasp that suggested years of smoking. Yes, who is this? My name is Richard Blackwell. I'm your husband's attorney. Marcus doesn't know I'm calling you, and I'd appreciate if we could keep it that way. I pulled into a parking lot, unable to drive and process this conversation at the same time. Why are you calling me? Because in 8 days, your husband is either going to be cleared or he's going to be indicted for murder, and in either scenario, you need to understand what you're facing. Marcus has been trying to protect you by keeping you in the dark, but I think that's a mistake. I think you deserve to know the truth. My heart was pounding. Then tell me what really happened. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Can we meet in person? This isn't a conversation to have over the phone. There's a park on Riverside Drive, near the marina. Can you be there in 30 minutes? Every warning bell in my head was going off. Meeting a stranger in a park, a lawyer who was calling me behind my husband's back, all of it screamed danger. But the desperate need to understand what was happening overrode my caution. I'll be there. The park was nearly empty when I arrived. Just a few joggers on the path and an elderly man feeding ducks by the water. I spotted Richard Blackwell immediately. He was in his 60s, distinguished-looking with silver hair and sharp features, wearing an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the casual park setting. He was sitting on a bench overlooking the water, and he stood when he saw me approaching. Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for coming. His handshake was firm, professional. I know this must be extremely confusing and frightening for you. You said you'd tell me the truth, I said, sitting down on the bench. So please, just tell me, did my husband kill Daniel Reeves? Blackwell sat beside me, his expression grave. That's the question, isn't it? The question I've been trying to answer for the past 6 months. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband swears he's innocent. He swears he didn't kill Daniel Reeves, that he was at that warehouse that night, but someone else did the killing. And I believe him. The relief that flooded through me was so intense I felt dizzy. You believe him? Then why does Detective Morrison seem so convinced he's guilty? Because the evidence is damning, even if it's circumstantial. Let me explain what actually happened that night, or at least what Marcus has told me. Blackwell pulled out a folder from his briefcase. 6 months ago, Marcus discovered that his boss, a man named Thomas Whitmore, was embezzling money from the company. Substantial amounts, over $1 million spread across various accounts and fake vendor payments. I stared at him, trying to process this new information. Marcus found out about embezzlement? Yes, and he made the mistake of confronting Whitmore directly instead of going to the authorities. Whitmore panicked and hired Daniel Reeves, the private investigator, to dig up dirt on Marcus, something he could use as leverage to keep Marcus quiet about the embezzlement. But Daniel ended up dead. Daniel discovered the embezzlement evidence himself during his investigation. He realized he'd been hired to intimidate a whistleblower, and his conscience got the better of him. He contacted Marcus and arranged to meet at that warehouse to give him copies of everything he'd found, documentation that would prove Whitmore's crimes and exonerate Marcus. I was starting to see where this was going. But Marcus showed up and found Daniel dead. Exactly. Someone got there first. Someone who knew about the meeting and couldn't let that evidence exchange hands. Marcus found Daniel's body, panicked, and ran. By the time he called me the next day, the police had already identified his car on the security footage. Why didn't he just tell the police the truth? Blackwell's expression darkened. Because Whitmore is a very powerful man with connections throughout the city, including within the police department. Marcus was terrified that going to the police would result in him being framed for the murder, while Whitmore walked free. So he hired me, and we've been trying to build a case that proves his innocence while also exposing Whitmore's crimes. It made a horrible kind of sense. Marcus hadn't killed anyone, but he'd gotten caught up in something much bigger than himself, something that threatened to destroy him anyway. The grand jury in 8 days, what happens then? We present our evidence. We try to convince them that Marcus is innocent and that they should be investigating Thomas Whitmore instead. But I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Mitchell, it's not looking good. Whitmore has covered his tracks well, and most of our evidence is circumstantial, just like the evidence against Marcus. It could go either way. I thought about the journal entries, about Marcus's fear and guilt. It all made sense now. He wasn't guilty of murder, but he was carrying the weight of knowing he'd contributed to Daniel Reeves's death by involving him in this mess. Why are you telling me all this? Why now? Because if the grand jury indicts Marcus, your life is going to become very difficult very quickly. The media will descend, your finances will be scrutinized, and you'll be caught up in a legal nightmare that could last years. You need to prepare yourself. And you need to decide whether you're going to stand by your husband through this. The question hung in the air between us. Would I stand by Marcus? Even now, knowing the truth, or at least a version of it, I wasn't sure. He'd lied to me for 6 months, had let me believe everything was fine while his entire world crumbled around him. How could I trust him after that? There's something else, Blackwell said, pulling out a photograph from his folder. Do you recognize this woman? I looked at the photo and my blood ran cold. It was the old woman from outside the restaurant, the one who'd given me the money. She looked younger in the photo, maybe in her 60s instead of 80s, but it was definitely her. Who is she? I whispered. Her name is Margaret Whitmore. She's Thomas Whitmore's mother. The world tilted again. The old woman was the embezzler's mother? Nothing made sense anymore. Why would she warn me? Why would she give me money and tell me to run? Blackwell's expression was sympathetic. I don't know for certain, but I can guess. Margaret Whitmore is a complicated woman. By all accounts, she's deeply ashamed of what her son has become. Maybe warning you was her way of trying to do something good, to save someone from the destruction Thomas causes. Or maybe she was trying to make me look guilty, I said, the realization hitting me. $20,000 in cash, given to the wife of a murder suspect right before the grand jury convenes? That looks suspicious, doesn't it? It looks like Marcus gave me money to run, like he's guilty and planning to flee. Blackwell nodded slowly. That's certainly one interpretation, which is why I think you should give that money to Detective Morrison as soon as possible, with a full explanation of how you received it. Don't let this become another piece of evidence they can use against Marcus. I thought about my meeting with the detective that morning, how she'd asked me to bring the money in today. I'd been so focused on keeping my escape route that I hadn't considered how it might look to investigators. I'm supposed to take it to the police station this afternoon. Good, do that. Be completely honest with them about the encounter. The truth is your best defense here, Mrs. Mitchell. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the water lap against the shore. A family of ducks paddled by, oblivious to the human drama unfolding on the bench above them. I envied their simplicity, their uncomplicated lives. Mr. Blackwell, can I ask you something? As Marcus's lawyer, you must have asked him directly. Do you truly believe he's innocent? He turned to look at me fully, his eyes serious. I've been a criminal defense attorney for 35 years, Mrs. Mitchell. I've represented guilty people and innocent people, and I've gotten very good at telling the difference. Your husband is telling the truth. He didn't kill Daniel Reeves. But the system doesn't always care about truth as much as it cares about what can be proven, and right now, the evidence against Marcus is stronger than the evidence in his favor. What are his chances, realistically? With the grand jury? Maybe 50-50. If they indict him and it goes to trial, probably worse. Unless we can find concrete evidence that ties Thomas Whitmore to the murder, or unless someone comes forward with information we don't have yet, your husband could spend the rest of his life in prison for something he didn't do. The weight of it all settled on my shoulders. 8 days until the grand jury. 8 days to somehow find evidence that would save my husband. 8 days to decide whether our marriage could survive this level of betrayal and secrecy, even if he was innocent of murder. What can I do? I asked. There must be something I can do to help. Blackwell hesitated, seeming to wrestle with something. There is one thing, though it's risky. We believe Thomas Whitmore keeps records of his embezzlement somewhere in his home, physical records, probably in a safe. If we could get our hands on those records, they might contain evidence linking him to Daniel's murder. But we can't legally access his home, and any evidence obtained illegally would be inadmissible in court. But if someone found those records and turned them over to the police anonymously, I said slowly, that would be different. Mrs. Mitchell, I can't ask you to break into someone's home. That would make you guilty of a crime, and it could jeopardize the entire case. You're not asking, I said, my mind already racing. I'm volunteering. How would I even get into his house? Blackwell pulled out another document from his folder, looking conflicted. Whitmore is hosting a charity gala at his estate this Saturday. It's a big event, hundreds of people. Marcus was invited before all this started. Obviously, he won't be attending now, but the invitation is in both your names. You could go, blend in with the crowd, and if you were careful, you might be able to slip away and search his private office. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was potentially illegal and could backfire spectacularly. But as I sat there on that bench, thinking about Marcus in prison for a crime he didn't commit, thinking about the life we'd built together crumbling to dust, I knew I was going to do it. Tell me everything I need to know about Thomas Whitmore's house, I said. Blackwell studied me for a long moment, then opened his folder and began to explain. As the sun set over the water and the park emptied around us, I transformed from a confused, frightened wife into something else entirely. Someone who would break the law to save her husband. Someone who would risk everything for the truth. I just hoped it would be enough. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. I went to the police station as promised and turned over the $20,000, explaining my encounter with Margaret Whitmore in detail. Detective Morrison had been skeptical but interested, particularly when I mentioned the connection to Thomas Whitmore. She'd kept the money as evidence and warned me again to be careful, to not do anything that might compromise the investigation. If only she knew what I was planning. Marcus had been distant since my unexpected visit to his office, watching me with a wariness that broke my heart. We moved around each other like strangers, the silence between us heavy with unspoken truths. I wanted to tell him I knew everything, that I was trying to help, but Blackwell had advised against it. The less Marcus knew about my plan, the better. If anything went wrong, he could honestly claim he had no knowledge of what I'd done. On Friday evening, Marcus came home from work looking exhausted, the weight of the impending grand jury hearing visible in every line of his face. We ate dinner in near silence, and I almost broke then, almost reached across the table and told him everything. But I held back, knowing that tomorrow night would either save us or destroy us completely. Saturday arrived with deceptive normalcy. Bright sunshine, crisp autumn air, the kind of day that made you believe good things were possible. I spent the morning getting ready, transforming myself into someone who belonged at a high society charity gala. I'd bought a new dress for the occasion, a deep emerald green that Marcus had always said brought out my eyes. I styled my hair in an elegant updo, applied makeup with more care than usual, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Marcus found me as I was putting on my earrings. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "Where are you going?" I'd prepared for this question, had rehearsed my answer. "Amanda's birthday party, remember? The fancy dinner at that new restaurant downtown. I told you about it last week." It was a lie, of course. Amanda was my college roommate who lived 3 states away, but Marcus had been so preoccupied lately that I was counting on him not remembering or questioning the details. He nodded slowly, still watching me with those careful eyes. "What time will you be home?" "Late, probably. You know how these things go. Dinner and drinks and everyone catching up. Don't wait up for me." He crossed the room then, and for a moment I thought he was going to stop me, to demand the truth. Instead, he pulled me into his arms, holding me tight against his chest. I could feel his heart beating fast, could sense the desperation in his grip. "Sarah," he whispered into my hair, "whatever happens, whatever comes next, I need you to know that I love you. I've loved you since the day we met, and that's never been a lie. Everything I've done, every choice I've made, it's been to protect you." I pulled back to look at him, tears stinging my eyes. "Marcus, just let me say this." His voice was urgent now, almost pleading. "In a few days, everything is going to come out. The grand jury, the investigation, all of it. And I know I should have told you sooner, should have trusted you with the truth. But I was scared. I'm still scared. I'm terrified of losing you, of you looking at me and seeing a stranger, a criminal, someone you can't trust anymore." "You're not a criminal," I said fiercely, abandoning all pretense. "I know about Daniel Reeves, about Thomas Whitmore, about all of it, and I know you didn't kill anyone." His face went white. Who told you?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I believe you, Marcus. I believe you're innocent, and I'm going to help prove it." "No." He grabbed my shoulders, his grip almost painful. "No, Sarah, you need to stay out of this. It's too dangerous. Whitmore is connected, powerful, and he's already killed once to protect his secrets. I can't let you get involved." "I'm already involved," I said, pulling away from him. "I'm your wife. Your life is my life, and I won't stand by and watch you go to prison for something you didn't do." We stared at each other, years of marriage and shared history suspended between us. Finally, Marcus's shoulders sagged in defeat. "What are you planning to do?" I told him, about the gala, about Blackwell's information regarding the safe in Whitmore's office, about my plan to search for evidence while the party provided cover. With every word, Marcus's expression grew more horrified. "Absolutely not," he said when I'd finished. "Sarah, that's breaking and entering. If you get caught, you'll be arrested. If Whitmore realizes what you're doing, he might hurt you. I won't allow it." "You don't get to allow or not allow anything," I said, my voice harder than I'd intended. "You made choices without me for 6 months, Marcus. You decided to keep me in the dark, to lie about where you were and what you were dealing with. So now I'm making a choice. I'm going to that gala, and I'm going to find evidence that clears your name." "Then I'm coming with you." "No. If you show up at Whitmore's house, it'll look suspicious. It has to be me, alone, just another wealthy wife at a charity event. You need to stay here and establish an alibi. Go to a movie, get dinner somewhere public. Make sure you're seen by people who can verify your whereabouts." We argued for another 20 minutes, Marcus trying every angle to dissuade me standing firm in my decision. Finally, he realized I wasn't going to back down. "If you're going to do this," he said, his voice heavy with resignation, "at least let me help you prepare. Whitmore's estate is massive. Security will be tight. You need to know exactly where you're going and how to get in and out without being noticed." We spent the next hour going over the layout of Whitmore's house, which Marcus knew from company events held there in the past. The office was on the 2nd floor, accessible by a back staircase near the kitchen. The safe would likely be behind a painting or built into the wall, somewhere not immediately obvious but within easy reach. Marcus gave me tips on what to look for, how to act natural if someone questioned me, how to make excuses if I was caught somewhere I shouldn't be. By the time I left the house that evening, I was as prepared as I was going to be. The invitation was in my clutch, along with a small flashlight, a burner phone that couldn't be traced back to me, and a tiny camera to photograph any documents I found. I felt like a character in a spy movie, except this was real and the stakes were impossibly high. The drive to Whitmore's estate took 40 minutes, winding through increasingly exclusive neighborhoods until I reached the gated entrance. I gave my name to the security guard, who checked his list and waved me through. The driveway was already lined with expensive cars, and I could hear the sound of music and laughter floating from the house. The estate was even more impressive than Marcus had described. A sprawling mansion that looked like it belonged in a historical drama, all white columns and manicured gardens. Valets were taking cars, and beautifully dressed people were streaming through the massive front doors into a foyer that glittered with chandeliers and marble floors. I handed my keys to a valet and joined the crowd, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. The main ballroom was enormous, decorated with thousands of flowers and filled with the city's elite. A string quartet played in one corner, while guests mingled and laughed, discussing business deals and vacation homes, as if the world was a simple, beautiful place. I spotted Thomas Whitmore almost immediately. He was in his 50s, handsome in a corporate way, with perfectly styled hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was holding court near the bar, surrounded by admirers and sycophants. Looking at him, it was hard to believe he was capable of murder. He looked like every other successful businessman at the party, polished and confident and utterly ordinary. But I knew better. Somewhere in this house was evidence of his crimes, and I was going to find it. I circulated through the party for the next hour, making small talk with strangers, laughing at jokes I didn't find funny, playing the part of just another guest enjoying an elegant evening. All the while, I was watching, waiting for the right moment to slip away. That moment came when dinner was announced. As the crowd began moving toward the dining room, I made my way toward the back of the house, toward the kitchen Marcus had told me about. The hallway was temporarily empty, the staff all occupied with serving dinner to hundreds of guests. I found the back staircase easily and climbed it quickly, my heart pounding. The second floor was quiet, most of the noise contained to the lower level. I moved down the hallway, counting doors until I reached the one Marcus had described, Whitmore's private office. The door was locked, but it was a simple lock, the kind meant to keep out casual intruders rather than determined ones. I pulled out a bobby pin from my hair, something I'd practiced with on our own interior doors for the past 2 days, and worked at the mechanism until I heard a soft click. The office was dark, and I closed the door behind me before turning on my small flashlight. The beam illuminated a room that reeked of wealth and power. Expensive furniture, original artwork on the walls, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes that probably had never been read. I moved quickly to the desk, searching through drawers, finding nothing but ordinary office supplies and business correspondence. The safe had to be here somewhere. I checked behind the paintings, running my hands along the walls, looking for any indication of a hidden compartment. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. Downstairs, I could hear the murmur of conversation as dinner began. How long did I have before someone noticed I wasn't at my assigned seat? Before Whitmore himself came upstairs for something? Then I saw it. A section of the bookshelf that didn't quite match the others, where the books looked slightly newer, less dusty. I pulled on the edge and the entire section swung open, revealing a wall safe behind it. The safe had an electronic keypad. I stared at it, my mind racing. Marcus had said Whitmore was arrogant, that he'd use something obvious because he never imagined anyone would get this far. I tried the most common combinations, 0000, 1234, Whitmore's birthday that I'd looked up online. Nothing worked. Then I remembered something Blackwell had mentioned. Whitmore had a daughter who died in a car accident 10 years ago. I found her death date with a quick search on my burner phone and entered it into the keypad. The safe clicked open. Inside were stacks of documents, USB drives, and leather notebooks. I pulled out my camera and began photographing everything, working as quickly as I could. Financial records showing transfers to offshore accounts, falsified invoices, emails discussing the embezzlement. And then, buried beneath everything else, I found what I was really looking for. A handwritten note on Whitmore's personal stationery. DR becoming a problem. Meeting at warehouse location, June 15, 10 p.m. Cannot let evidence reach authorities. Will handle permanently. DR. Daniel Reeves. This was it. This was proof that Whitmore had planned the murder, that he'd been at that warehouse, that Marcus was innocent. My hands were shaking as I photographed the note from every angle, making sure every word was clearly visible. Then I carefully replaced everything in the safe exactly as I'd found it and swung the bookshelf section closed. I'd done it. I had the evidence that would save Marcus. I was halfway across the office when the door opened and the lights flicked on. Thomas Whitmore stood in the doorway, and he was pointing a gun directly at my chest. Time seemed to freeze. I stood in the middle of Thomas Whitmore's office, my camera still clutched in my trembling hand, staring down the barrel of a gun held by a man who had already killed once to protect his secrets. The expression on his face was cold, calculated, nothing like the charming host I'd seen downstairs just an hour ago. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his voice eerily calm, "I was wondering when you'd show up. I've been expecting someone to try something desperate as the grand jury date approaches, though I'll admit I thought it would be your husband rather than you." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even as my heart hammered against my ribs. "I got lost looking for the bathroom." He smiled, but it was a terrible smile, devoid of warmth or humor. "With a camera in your hand? Please don't insult my intelligence. I saw you on the security feed, watched you pick the lock and open my safe. Did you really think I wouldn't have cameras in my own office?" Of course there were cameras. I'd been so focused on getting in and finding the evidence that I hadn't even considered surveillance. How could I have been so stupid? Whitmore stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, never lowering the gun. "The question now is what to do with you. I could call the police, have you arrested for breaking and entering. That would certainly damage your husband's case, make him look guilty by association. But I think we both know that's not going to solve my real problem." "Which is?" I asked, buying time, my mind racing for any possible escape. "You've seen what's in that safe. You photographed evidence that could destroy me. I can't let you leave this room with that camera, Mrs. Mitchell. I can't let you leave this room at all." The implication was clear. He was going to kill me, just as he'd killed Daniel Reeves. My death would be another tragic accident, another unsolved mystery. And Marcus would spend the rest of his life not only fighting murder charges, but grieving the wife he'd lost trying to save him. "There are 300 people downstairs," I said desperately. "People who saw me arrive, who know I'm here. You can't just make me disappear." Can't I? A tragic accident, a woman who'd had too much champagne wandering onto the balcony, a terrible fall. These things happen at parties, and with your husband about to be indicted for murder, well, perhaps the stress was too much. Perhaps you were distraught, not thinking clearly. The police would be sympathetic, really. No one would look too closely. He was insane. Not in a wild, obvious way, but in the cold, rational manner of someone who had convinced himself that murder was simply a business decision, a problem to be solved. I understood in that moment how he'd been able to kill Daniel Reeves without remorse, how he was prepared to kill me just as easily. "Margaret warned me about you," I said, grasping at anything that might buy me more time. "Your own mother knew what kind of monster you are. She tried to help me escape." Something flickered across Whitmore's face at the mention of his mother. "My mother is a sentimental old woman who doesn't understand how the world works. She built her fortune through ruthlessness and ambition, yet she judges me for doing the same. The hypocrisy is almost amusing. She gave me $20,000 to run. She knew you'd killed Daniel, knew you'd come after me too." "Yes, I'm aware. She's been quite the problem lately, interfering where she shouldn't. But she's old, and her mind isn't what it used to be. No one takes her seriously anymore." He gestured with the gun toward the balcony door on the far side of the office. "Now, let's take a walk. Give me that camera first." I clutched it tighter. "No." "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm holding a gun. You don't have a choice here." "Then shoot me," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Shoot me right here in your office, with 300 witnesses downstairs who will hear the gunshot. Explain that to the police. Explain how a woman you claim had an accident somehow ended up with a bullet in her." We stared at each other, locked in a terrible standoff. Whitmore's finger tightened on the trigger, and I braced myself for the impact, for the pain, for the end. But the shot didn't come. He was calculating, weighing risks, and I just made his preferred solution more complicated. "Fine," he said finally. "We'll do this differently. You're going to delete those photos, right now, in front of me. Then we're going to go downstairs together. You're going to claim you felt ill and needed some air, and we're going to pretend this never happened." "And then what? You let me go home, knowing what I know? You think I won't go straight to the police?" "I think you'll realize that without evidence you have nothing. It'll be your word against mine, and I'm a respected businessman while you're the desperate wife of a murder suspect. Who do you think they'll believe?" His smile widened. "Besides, if you go to the police, if you cause me any more trouble, I'll make sure your husband is convicted. I have enough connections in the prosecutor's office to ensure that. But if you stay quiet, if you accept that Marcus is going to prison and move on with your life, I'll make sure the evidence against him remains circumstantial. He'll have a fighting chance." It was a devil's bargain. Give up the evidence that could save Marcus in exchange for a slightly better chance at his acquittal, or refuse and guarantee his conviction while also putting my own life at risk. I thought about Marcus at home, waiting to hear from me, praying I'd be safe. I thought about the 7 years we'd spent together, the life we'd built, the future we'd planned. I thought about growing old alone, visiting him in prison, watching the man I loved waste away behind bars for a crime he didn't commit, and I made my choice. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not deleting anything, and I'm not staying quiet. You're going to let me walk out of here with this evidence, or I'm going to start screaming for help and let everyone downstairs know exactly what kind of man is hosting their charity gala." Whitmore's face darkened with rage. "You stupid woman. Do you have any idea what you're doing? I will destroy you. I will destroy your husband. I will—" The door burst open. Detective Morrison stood in the doorway, her gun drawn and pointed at Whitmore. Behind her were 2 uniformed officers, also armed. "Put the weapon down, Mr. Whitmore. Now." For a moment, I thought Whitmore might refuse, might shoot me anyway in a final act of desperation. But survival instinct won out. He slowly lowered the gun and placed it on the desk, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice tight. "This woman broke into my home, into my private office. I was defending my property." "We have audio and video of everything that just happened," Detective Morrison said, moving into the room with her weapon still trained on Whitmore. "The camera you were so concerned about? It was broadcasting directly to us the entire time. We heard you threaten Mrs. Mitchell. We heard you essentially confess to murdering Daniel Reeves." I stared at the detective in shock. "You knew I was coming here? Your husband called us this afternoon in a panic, said his wife was planning to break into a suspect's home to look for evidence. He begged us to stop you, to arrest you if necessary to keep you safe." She glanced at me with something that might have been respect. "We decided to let you proceed, but with backup. The camera you're holding? We swapped it out this morning for one with a live feed. We've been watching everything." Marcus had called the police. He'd known he couldn't stop me, so he'd made sure I was protected, even knowing it might complicate his own case, even risking that the police wouldn't believe him. He'd prioritized my safety over everything else. One of the officers was handcuffing Whitmore now, reading him his rights. The man who had seemed so powerful, so untouchable just minutes ago, now looked smaller somehow, diminished. He glared at me with pure hatred as they led him toward the door. "You've ruined everything," he spat. "Do you understand that? Everything I built, everything I worked for, destroyed by a stupid woman playing detective." "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed it yourself when you decided that money was worth more than a human life. When you killed a man to protect your secrets. This is justice, Mr. Whitmore. This is what you deserve." They took him away and I sank into the nearest chair, my legs finally giving out. Detective Morrison holstered her weapon and approached me, her expression softer now. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid," she said. "You could have been killed." "I know, but I had to try. I had to do something to save my husband." "Well, you did. The evidence you photographed, combined with Whitmore's statements tonight, should be more than enough to clear Marcus and secure a conviction against the real killer." She paused. "Your husband really loves you, Mrs. Mitchell. When he called us today, he was terrified for you. He said he'd rather go to prison innocent than have you risk your life trying to prove it." Tears were streaming down my face now, all the fear and tension of the past hour, the past week, the past 6 months finally breaking through. "Can I see him? Can I go home?" "We'll need your statement first, but yes, we'll have an officer drive you home when we're done here." The next hour passed in a blur of questions and official statements. Downstairs, the party had dissolved into chaos as word spread that the host had been arrested for murder. Guests were being questioned, security footage was being collected, and the beautiful facade of Thomas Whitmore's life was crumbling in real time. Finally, I was allowed to leave. A young officer drove me home in a patrol car, and I sat in the back seat watching the familiar streets pass by, feeling like I'd been gone for years instead of hours. When we pulled up to my house, I saw Marcus standing on the porch, pacing back and forth, his phone clutched in his hand. He saw the police car and ran down the steps, his face a mixture of relief and anguish. The officer let me out, and I barely made it 2 steps before Marcus swept me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for all of it, for lying to you, for putting you in danger, for not trusting you with the truth from the beginning. Sarah, I thought I was protecting you, but I almost got you killed." "You saved me," I said, pulling back to look at him. "You called the police. You made sure I was safe. Marcus, it's over. Whitmore's been arrested. You're going to be cleared." He searched my face, looking for any sign that I was hurt, that I was lying, that this was too good to be true. "It's really over?" "It's really over." We stood there on our front lawn, holding each other while the police officer drove away and the night settled around us. There was still so much to process, so much to work through. The lies, the broken trust, the 6 months of deception that had nearly destroyed us. But we were alive. We were together. And for the first time in what felt like forever, there was hope. Morning arrived quietly, as if the world itself were reluctant to disturb us. Pale sunlight crept through the curtains, tracing soft lines across the bedroom walls. I lay awake long before Marcus stirred, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me, grounding myself in the simple, miraculous fact that he was here, and that neither of us was dead. The night after the gala had been a haze of exhaustion and tears. We hadn't talked much, just held each other, clinging as if letting go might cause everything to unravel again. Sleep eventually claimed us both, heavy and dreamless. Now, reality waited. Marcus shifted and opened his eyes, blinking as if he'd forgotten where he was for a moment. Then his gaze found mine, and something fragile but hopeful crossed his face. "You're still here," he said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere," I replied. He exhaled, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob, and pulled me closer. "I keep expecting a call telling me it was all a mistake." "I know," I said. "So do I." As if summoned by the thought, Marcus's phone buzzed on the nightstand. We both froze. He stared at it for a second before answering, putting it on speaker with trembling fingers. "Mitchell," he said. "Marcus, it's Detective Morrison," came the calm, familiar voice. "I wanted you to hear this directly. The district attorney has reviewed the evidence from last night. All charges against you are being dropped, effective immediately." Marcus's hand flew to his mouth. I felt his entire body go rigid beside me. You're sure?" he asked. "I'm sure. Whitmore's financial records, the forged documents, the recording of his threats, and his prior connection to Reeves, he's done. He confessed again during questioning when he realized how much we had. You're officially cleared." Marcus let out a broken sound and collapsed back onto the pillow, staring at the ceiling as tears streamed down his temples. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." After the call ended, neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then Marcus turned toward me and pressed his forehead to mine. "You saved my life," he said. "No," I replied gently. "We saved each other." Later that afternoon, the house filled with noise. Phones ringing, messages pouring in, reporters already sniffing around the edges of the story. We ignored most of it. For the first time in months, there was no immediate crisis demanding our attention. Still, there were things we couldn't avoid. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee growing cold between us, the weight of everything unspoken settling heavily in the air. "I should have told you," Marcus said finally. "About Whitmore, about Daniel, about everything. I convinced myself silence was safer, but it nearly destroyed us." I nodded. "I understand why you did it. But understanding doesn't erase how alone I felt, how scared." "I know," he said, voice thick. "I'll spend the rest of my life making that right, if you'll let me." I reached across the table and took his hand. Trust isn't fixed overnight, but I'm willing to rebuild, slowly, honestly. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood on the porch and watched our quiet street glow under the streetlights. Somewhere across town, Thomas Whitmore was sitting in a holding cell, stripped of power, exposed at last. Justice hadn't come easily, but it had come. For us, the future was still uncertain. There would be therapy, long conversations, scars that wouldn't fully fade. But there would also be mornings like this, sunlight, coffee, and the steady presence of the person who had chosen love over fear when it mattered most. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cool night air. For the first time since Daniel Reeves died, the story no longer belonged to a murderer. It belonged to us. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to reclaim its rhythm. The glare of headlines faded, replaced by the quiet hum of ordinary days. Whitmore's trial was set to begin, and this time, the truth would speak for itself. Marcus and I no longer lived under the shadow of suspicion. His name was cleared, our reputations restored, but the experience had left an indelible mark. We returned to simple routines: morning coffee on the porch, walks through the neighborhood, Marcus tinkering in the garage while I worked on my photography. The camera that had nearly cost me my life now sat on a shelf, a reminder of the risks we had taken and the courage we had found. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose, Marcus turned to me with a nervous smile. "Sarah," he said, taking my hands in his, "I don't want to waste another day worrying about what might happen. I want to focus on what can happen, with you." My heart caught, and I felt the same rush of hope I had the night we'd finally been reunited. "I feel the same way," I said softly. He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Opening it revealed a ring, simple but beautiful, a promise of new beginnings. "Marry me?" he asked, eyes shining. Tears welled in my eyes, and I nodded, laughter and relief bubbling up together. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." That night, as we stood on our porch holding each other close, the city lights sparkling in the distance, I realized how fragile life was and how fiercely worth protecting. We had faced danger, betrayal, and fear, yet here we were, stronger and closer than ever. The past would always be a part of us, but it no longer defined us. Our story, the one we were still writing together, belonged only to us now. And for the first time in a very long time, I could finally breathe, knowing that love, courage, and truth had won.